Howdy folks, good noontime. Here is a part 3 video at Cedar Point Environmental Center. So now we're actually out at the Lemon Bay at the moment. And I figured, since it's low tide right now, I thought it would be perfect to produce another video to also educate as well. So without further ado, let's get into our little lesson, shall we? Here we go. Alrighty, so as I was mentioning, I'm out at the Lemon Bay, which is a well-known estuary in this part of Florida. Now we got like a little blue heron right there, and that looks like a whimbrel as well. So we got some wildlife looking for food at the moment. But I've actually done past videos out here when I was volunteering with Gerald, who is a naturalist at Cedar Point Environmental Center. So actually, Gerald, I want to provide you a shout out. So I hope this video finds you well. Okay. But what I really wanted to focus on this video are the seagrasses. So you may notice, down here and even here, you may notice some seagrass. Now, you may be wondering, is seagrass also a type of algae? As it turns out, seagrass is not the same thing as algae. Even though they look like they could be, they're not. And here's why. These seagrasses that I'm pointing out, they are indeed vascular plants, but they're just underneath the water, or underwater. So that means what they do is they actually have like a rhizome, which is basically a seed structure that anchors into the sand. Not only that, but they also go through the process of the famous word of photosynthesis, in which they use the sunlight, and they will use that sunlight to produce glucose, which is a common form of sugar, and in turn will also produce oxygen as a result that is dissolved in the water. So in a sense, they kind of act like our trees underwater. But they're still not algae though. Because unlike with most algae, they just have a simple structure, as they don't have any veins, nothing of the sort, to transport nutrients and whatnot. So just think of this as actual grass, but underneath the water. So, with that being said, right here, we've got something called the manatee grass, which oftentimes is a much thinner grass, in terms of its stem. And they'll typically grow maybe, 2 to 3 feet, maybe even less than that, actually. This is probably 2 to 3 feet. 2 to 3 inches, pardon me. Because as you can see, they really aren't that tall. But then, when you go a little further out, this is where you start running into the manatee grass. So let me show you guys an example. Here we go. So as you can see, from when we were looking at the manatee grass, that was a lot thinner. But then when you look at the... Oh wait, give me a second, you guys. Hold on. Okay, I'm just gonna do a repeat. Yeah, so to clarify, this is actually turtle grass. Yes, I had to do a bit of a memory jog, my bad. But turtle grass is typically a bit more rectangular shaped. And these can be at least a foot long. Close to it, at least. Now, oftentimes, you'll find epiphytic algae that lives on the stalk of the grass itself. The turtle grass, to be specific. So, in a sense, for our wildlife, these are actually very essential for our crustaceans, birds, and even our fish, too. Seagrass is basically like a salad in these waters. Not only that, but they can also provide a bit of a nursery for our fellow homies, too. But as I was mentioning, these seagrasses can also be used for stationary organisms, too, such as those epiphytic algae that I was speaking of just a moment ago. But you can see that they're quite numerous right now. But they also provide an excellent means of stabilizing the sand that's in these waters. Were it not for the seagrass being present, it's very likely that there would be massive rates of erosion. So think of it this way. They're kind of like mangroves, but underwater instead. And it's actually been believed that in terms of all the seagrass beds that exist on the planet, it's believed that each year they store up to 83 million metric tons of carbon each year. That's insane. That's a lot of carbon that they store. So with that being mentioned, seagrass beds are oftentimes known as a carbon sink, or specifically a blue carbon sink. They just call it blue carbon because it can be in the ocean or in a bay. But since they store that much carbon, that's how we know that it's a carbon sink. It basically describes a section where carbon is absorbed. And thus, it can actually provide more nutrients for the seagrass beds and even the sand that's here too, making it very fertile for any future growth. But yeah, they're just cool. They're not just cool, but they're amazing. Now, oftentimes, they can face some threats. Threats can include, some of them can get diseased, like they can fight a disease, which causes them to die. Or some of it can be human activity as well. That's been a large one. Or even overgrazing from our wildlife too. And even like boat propellers too, like boats that pass through here, they can also interfere with the growth process that these seagrass beds go through. So there's a lot of variables that can really interfere with their existence. But oftentimes, too, this was a story I knew from my mentor, Garrett Stewart. Shout out anyways. He actually mentioned when he was down in the Keys, they, like a lot of the resorts, they would oftentimes remove the seagrass beds because of the smell. I mean, kind of like right now, it does smell a little bit. You can really smell that methane, a little bit of that stink. But that's just because seagrass beds naturally die over time. And thus, since they're decaying, they produce those gases that really cause a bit of a stink smell. So when that happened, a lot of these resorts wanted these beds to be removed. But then as the as they found out, it wasn't working. The method of removing these seagrass beds was not effective, because then they came to find out that there was worse erosion, less biodiversity, and even poor quality in terms of the nutrients, or even excess nutrients, speaking of such. So essentially, these also act as filters too, since they have that capability of absorbing nutrients that are capable of exacerbating a harmful algal bloom. So that's why seagrass beds oftentimes deserve the love too, since they provide a huge ecosystem service. Oftentimes they're considered to be the third most productive ecosystem in the world, which falls behind mangroves and estuaries. So that's why I figured, since I was right here, I would provide some attention, you could say. Give the seagrass beds some love too. But every now and then, Gerald, who works here, he actually provides like a seagrass wading trip in which you have a chance to really see some of the organisms that thrive in these waters. Some of them can be fighting conchs or even stone crabs. Those are just to name a couple. But we definitely need more of these in the natural world. And they're still even facing a threat as well. So alright, you guys. Hope you enjoyed this video today and learned something of value. This is a place well worth visiting. It's a cool place. And it's relatively small, so you don't have to do a ton of hiking whatsoever. It's easy to get around, you could say. It's alright, you guys. I hope you all enjoy your Sunday and journey on a journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.